I'm Rich Wagner, and welcome to Albuquerque's bosque, the riparian zone which runs for mile after mile through the heart of this enchanting city and is made up of magnificent cottonwood gallery forests. Today is a particularly good day to visit the bosque. Fall is in the air, and as you can see behind me, the trees are still changing amazing colors. Surprisingly, many of Albuquerque's residents are unaware of the great diversity of life which this complex ecosystem supports. Any time of the year you'll find porcupines in the trees or badgers in their dens. Coyotes and foxes prowl the underbrush, woodpeckers eke out a living in the trees, and great blue herons can be found wading in the river. A plethora of multicolored songbirds often grace these branches, and soon we'll be seeing many of our winter residents returning. We'll have bald eagles and osprey, and already the sandhill cranes are arriving by the thousands to overwinter here. Today is also a particularly good day to be in the bosque because the changes we see around us highlight the dichotomy between what we see and what we may ultimately get. This vibrant forest and all the life in it hinge on the cottonwoods, and they are not doing well. To go very far to see some of the signs of the problem. Many of the leaves we see here are very, very brown. Some of these brown leaves have actually been here since the fall before, or maybe the fall before that. Also, many of them went directly brown without going through some of their amazing fall colors. This is an indicator of many of the stressors which this forest ecosystem is subject to. We can even see some of the signs of the problem right here at our feet. A healthy bosque ecosystem should not have so much dead and down wood or thick layers of undecomposed leaves. In the past, floods would have washed a lot of this away or provided the moisture to break it all down, returning the nutrients to the soil. But this is not the bosque of the past, and the forces which drive the current ecosystem are the reason why the cottonwoods are dying. Cottonwoods are a foundational species in the bosque. They help to create the structure and function in the ecosystem upon which many other species depend for their survival. Native grasses, olive trees, and willows all depend on the stable shaded meadows that the cottonwoods help produce along the banks of the river so that they can thrive. Many species of animals depend on all of this structure for food and shelter. One of the biggest problems for the bosque is that the cottonwoods require regular flooding to build sandbars upon which their young can germinate. They also require consistent access to groundwater. Even these big trees that we see around us here only have root structures that are about 3 meters deep. That's only a little bit deeper than I am tall. In the past, regular flooding created a meandering river and what was called a patchwork mosaic of cottonwood stands and meadows along its banks. That's very different from the long cottonwood gallery forests that we have today. The last major flooding in the bosque was about 80 years ago, and that's about how old most of these trees are. So how all this happened? Well, humans did it. Flooding has not been that conducive for our living along the river, neither for our agriculture nor for our housing. So beginning centuries ago, we began to build ditches along the river for irrigation, which have drawn off a lot of water from the river. More recently, we've built a series of clear ditches. These clear ditches are designed to keep groundwater from flooding our homes and our fields where we live along the river. Unfortunately, these clear ditches also draw off water from the river, which the cottonwoods need. In 1973, we completed work on Cochiti Dam, which really put kind of the final nail on the coffin for a lot of the cottonwoods along the Albuquerque bosque. Unfortunately, this re-engineering of our river has done more than just stop building sandbars for the cottonwoods. It's created a channelization of the river, where it's become narrower and straighter. This channelization has also prevented sediment from dropping out in the river, so there's more erosion along the banks, and as a consequence, the river gets deeper and deeper. Along with pumping groundwater from the river for drinking and agriculture, this channelization of the river has really helped to draw down the groundwater levels even further, making it even more difficult for the cottonwoods. Because of the control of the river that the dam has afforded, regular flooding has really become a thing of the past. In fact, it's been about 80 years, as I said, since we've had major flood in the bosque. This has made it very difficult for the cottonwoods along the bosque, and if this trend continues, many studies indicate that we may have few to any surviving cottonwoods along long stretches of the Rio Grande bosque. Fire was never a major driver in the bosque ecosystem. but a drying climate, humans, and a lack of flooding has made it one. When a wildfire rages in the bosque, it not only devastates the ecosystem, but it creates openings for other problems. Behind me, you can see a stand of salt cedar and Russian olive. Humans have really exacerbated the problem through the introduction of non-native species, many of which become invasive. Elms, mulberries, Russian olives, all do better in the new drier climate of the bosque. Salt cedars, which were introduced as an ornamental and to control erosion about a century ago, do very well in this new drier climate. However, studies have shown that in areas with regular flooding, cottonwood seedlings can actually have a better time establishing than salt cedar seedlings. The area of the bosque running through Albuquerque is a protected state park, but many of the problems we've introduced do not respect these boundaries. If we do not take measures to protect this valuable ecosystem, the bosque of the future is going to be a very different place. Regardless of what we do, the presence of cottonwoods in the bosque is going to be greatly reduced. So what are some of the things we can do? What are some of the solutions being implemented? There are many different groups working on this problem, from government agencies to nonprofits to citizen groups. They have many different strategies and they don't always go hand in hand, but they do present a lot of solutions. Behind me, you can see one of the simplest ones. Simply plant more trees. These cottonwood pole plantings do require access to groundwater, so quite often failure rates can reach 100%. And even when well established, due to our falling water tables, can have a lot of failures. Behind me you can see a swale. There have been efforts to either lower the riverbanks or create these depressions by bulldozing large swaths of the bosque, which have been damaged by fires or invasive species. This can allow for lower river flows to simulate the historic flooding needed for cottonwood recruitment. These efforts have been successful, but they can also be very expensive and require long-term maintenance for enduring success. They also don't do anything to address the background problem, which is really the channelization of the river. Other efforts to simulate historic flooding include pulsed releases of additional water from Cochiti Dam. These have also been successful in cottonwood recruitment in some of these areas that have already been lowered by bulldozing. One of the problems with the pulsed releases is that they do require additional allocations of water from the state water budget, and getting those can be problematic. Invasive species removal programs have also been successful in clearing areas and making room for native species to be more successful. A problem with this is that not only are they labor intensive and require constant maintenance, but many of these exotic species are well adapted to the new drier bosque. The challenges to this fragile ecosystem are only growing as we pump more and more groundwater and as climate change exacerbates the situation. In the long run, saving the cottonwoods of Albuquerque's bosque is going to require a concerted implementation of many of these programs, as well as programs to raise public awareness so that we can increase funding. It may also be that public awareness is a bit late in coming. We may be required to allow a restructuring of the bosque ecosystem to include some of the exotics so that we can have a forest of some kind here in the future. The exotics do provide food and shelter for much of the wildlife, as well as crucial ecosystem functions in the absence of traditional structure. No matter the best course, it is going to take a concerted implementation of these programs, both with the agencies involved and the public, if we are to save this treasure in the heart of our city. Programs to raise concerted implementation exotic plants and animals. And stop. Shoot, I had that. I shouldn't have. Compounding the problems with me finishing my lines. We may need to look at allowing a restructuring of the bosque ecosystem to include a plane flying over, which is probably really messing with my sound. All right.
Cut.